Okay, we are on page 21. I know we just finished 21. We're going to go to page 22 in just a moment, but I have to tie this in together, so I just want you to look at this. We're talking about groaning. We're talking about travailing. We're talking about groaning in the Spirit and weeping and crying and all these manifestations and various manifestations of the Spirit that come out, usually has to do with tongues or is a part of the overall being of the Spirit within us coming out. So, if you look at the bottom of page 21, it has NT 5015. It's the word troubled. That was in verse 33 there, just above that. And it is the Greek word tarasso, and it means to stir, to agitate, to roll water, as we said. Now turn right on over to page 22. And let's look at John chapter 5. Now this is just tying this together, showing you the similarities here. In verse 1, it says, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is at Jerusalem, by the sheep market, a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. So you can see the connection between troubling of the water and healing, right? And it didn't matter who, and it didn't matter what they had, they got healed, right? Now that alone, the fact that it was a pool of water, that an angel would come down and trouble, should show you right there. And it says that whoever got healed of whatsoever, should prove to you that the disease and the sick person is not the key point in healing. All right? It's not, which is funny because in the church, that's all that counts, right? It's what this person did, it's what they didn't do, it's what, God's will is not his will today or something else, and it's, this person, and they sin, they didn't sin, they have faith, they don't have faith, they something, but it's always God and the sick person. And here, many times today there is a sick person or even what their disease is. Their disease is a punishment, it's a, character builder, okay, something like that. And honestly, usually when people get really sick, they don't have good character, okay? Selfishness comes out. I'm not saying, anything negative about them, just saying that's what happens, okay? When people hurt, they're not fun to be around, generally speaking, right? Because pain, especially constant pain, tends to put people on edge, which makes them generally agitated and, upset. So, but here he says, and I want you to notice this, where it said in verse 4, and troubled the water. You'll see it's underlined in your manual. And if you look there, that is the Greek word NT 5015. It's the Greek word tarasso, right? And it means to stir or to agitate. Now, you do realize that is exactly the same word just now on the other page that we just looked at in verse 33, where it said that he groaned in the Spirit and was troubled. And now notice, he groaned in the Spirit. That was him seeing and knowing and getting fed up with. And then troubled was stirring up the Spirit within him, right? Agitating the water of the Spirit, as we would say. And over here, we connect that with John 5, where it talks about how the water was troubled. And when the water was troubled, somebody got healed. Well, whenever Jesus troubled the Spirit within him, somebody got raised from the dead, right? Same word, same idea, same understanding, okay? Next, and said, verse 34, where have you laid him? Okay, now that was going back to this. I interjected that in between because now we're going back to the previous verse on page 21 where Jesus is back raising Lazarus from the dead. Okay, it may seem a little confusing there. I just put John 5 in there parenthetically to look at for a second. And then Jesus said, where have you laid him? And they said unto him, Lord, come and see. Then verse 35, Jesus wept. Okay. Then said the Jews, behold, how he loved him. And some of them said, could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind, have caused that even this man should not have died? Jesus, therefore, again, groaning in himself. In himself. Now, isn't that what Paul said? He said, we groaning in ourselves, right? It's the same idea. Then he, groaning in himself, comes to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. And Jesus said, take ye away the stone. And Martha, the sister of him that was dead, said unto him, Lord, by this time he stinks, for he has been dead 4 days. And Jesus said unto her, said I not unto thee, that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? And then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. Now, at this point, there's no movement. How does Jesus know God heard him? Because he knows he hears him, right? He didn't wait and see Lazarus come to the door and go, oh, God, I'm glad you heard me, right? Jesus wasn't wondering. He wasn't hoping and praying, right? He was believing and saying, right? And he said, I thank you that you've heard me, and I knew actually, that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that you have sent me. So the only reason he prayed was so that people would know he was connected to God. That's the only reason, right? Isn't that what he said? So, and when he had thus spoken, he cried with a loud voice. So see, we are scriptural in getting loud, right? Nothing wrong with that. And what he cried with a loud voice was, Lazarus, come forth. And then notice he didn't say, Father, please heal Lazarus, raise him from the dead. Father, do something, right? He commanded Lazarus. He said, Father, I'm talking to you just so these people can hear me talking to you, so they'll know I'm connected to you, and I thank you for it. I'm glad you hear me, and I know you always hear me, so I just want to thank you. Then he turns to the problem and speaks directly to the problem. He not once did he ever talk to God about Lazarus. That's something. Never talked to God about Lazarus. Okay? And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. And Jesus saith unto them, loose him and let him go. So he told the men that rolled away the stone to loose him and let him go. Now, you kind of wonder what was going on with Lazarus when first off, if you knew how they were prepared, how did he stand up? Because they were like mummies. Literally, it was hard. It was a case around him. So obviously something went on in the tomb here that we're not made privy to. And so he stood up and then moved to the door. And again, it doesn't say how that happened, right? But he moved to the door, and then they said, Jesus told him to let him go. And now look at Romans chapter 8, verse 34. It's right there on page 23. Jesus himself makes intercession for us. Who is he that condemneth? This is Paul writing to the Romans. It is Christ that died, yea, rather that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who also makes intercession for us. Now notice his Spirit in us also cries through us to intercede for us. Right? So now you got Jesus and the Spirit working together in harmony to speak through. Now, Jesus is seated at the right hand of the Father, but he also lives in you. Okay? But the Bible talks more about the Spirit being in you than Christ being in you. Okay? Now, admitted they're one and the same. They're connected, right? So they're in union. But the idea is that the Spirit in you makes intercession, and then our high priest takes that intercession and ever lives to make intercession for us. So what we pray out by the Spirit goes to Jesus, okay? And Jesus makes that intercession before the Father. Now, the good thing about that is you may not have much faith in your prayers, but you can have some faith in Jesus' prayers. All right? And the good thing is what he's praying is what you've just prayed. So he's just saying what you said, right? Pretty much that's what he does. He says, you hear that, Father? Yeah, what they said. That's right? And just takes you right on up, okay? Now, Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25. Here Jesus intercedes for us, and we intercede for the lost. Wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him, seeing he ever liveth to make intercession for them. Now, let's go to the next page, page 24. We're going to talk about crying aloud. We're going to look at some of the various aspects of what we had mentioned earlier. In Psalm 55, verse 16, it starts out saying, As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. He will pray and cry aloud. Okay? See, we're going to have to break in the church, and there's a time and a place for things. Okay? And there are certain meetings that are for certain things. There are teaching meetings, there are evangelistic meetings, there are just believers meetings where you come together to operate in the gifts of the Spirit and to flow in the gifts of the Spirit. There's meetings for, as we would say, prayer meetings, that the purpose is to come together to pray either for a specific thing or for everybody to bring their problems in, to pray against these things, everybody agree with them and get them taken care of. Our problem is we try to play different games by the same rules. And there's different games and different rules, right? So with different types of meetings, there are believers meetings and then there are unbelievers meetings. One of the reasons why the church doesn't grow very much is because we treat every believer's meeting like an unbeliever's meeting. We'll have a room full of people that are saved that you deal with every Sunday, and then one person will come in that you're pretty sure is not saved, and all of a sudden your entire service will go toward evangelism, and everybody else, everything has to drop to the lowest common denominator rather than rising up. When I was in South Africa, I guess a couple of years ago now, maybe 2 years ago, we were in Durban? Nope, somewhere around there. Either Durban or Cape Town, regardless. I was preaching one night, and it was the healing service. And usually at a healing service, I try to preach something about healing. You would think that would go kind of together. And so, but it was strange this night because I'd been teaching the DHT, I think, all week. And then when I got up to speak that night, I knew kind of the direction I was going. I knew it had nothing to do with healing. And I thought, okay, this is going to be different. But since it's not their faith that counts, it doesn't really matter what I preach, right? Because I know what I'm going to do no matter what. So I got up and I went to Colossians. And I basically did just a simple exposition of Colossians, a fairly short book, and just went through it verse by verse and hit some highlights on it. Didn't go in detail every verse, but hit the main things. And the main thing was about you being connected with God and being connected with Jesus and the fullness of the Godhead dwelling in Jesus, and now Jesus dwells in you and the fullness of God dwells in you, and you're supposed to walk in this life and how you're supposed to walk and all of this life coming out of you. It's kind of a precursor for the new man, basically. And so I preached and I told the people, I said, this is not, I'm really not preaching toward unbelievers. This is really believers. And I know there's a lot of unbelievers here, but this is for believers. And so I just preached. I said, this is the life you're supposed to live. This is what's in you and how you should be living the Christian life. So I preached, went through. We had more people healed that night during the preaching than we had during the rest of the services, for the most part. Just got healed listening to the life of God within them. And the amazing thing was, then when we started, because I had to let the people start praying for each other. And as we did that, somebody came and got me and said, Brother Kerr, would you go over and talk to this family? And I said, yeah. So I went over and there's a whole family, like 6 or 8 people. And I said, yeah, what can I do for you? And they said, oh, we just wanted to shake your hand and say thank you. We brought their child in for prayer, for healing. When they got to ministering to him, the child was healed. But they said, but also they wanted me to know that while I was preaching that night, they were not saved. And while I was preaching, they said, we want that life. And they got saved listening to basically the life that's available to live. I didn't get into, try to avoid hell. I didn't get into judgment and punishment and, I didn't get into any of that. It was just, this is what Jesus died to provide for you. And they grabbed a hold of it and the whole family got saved. The whole family got saved and their child got healed. And so the reason I'm saying this is because there has to be a point in us where we start having meetings specifically for certain things. And that's one of the reasons why eventually when we do the way we do the church here, we're going to go to 2 services. And the early service, which is the one that most non-saved people don't come to, right? They come to the, like the 11 o'clock service is when your non-saved people come, right? Because they want to sleep in late because they were out partying on Saturday. So, which unfortunately also applies to some Christians. But anyway, we're going to go to an early morning service even before the 11 o'clock, and the early morning is going to be for believers. And that's where we're going to get into details, and that's where we're going to really train and start getting into what people would call the meat of the word. We're going to really get into it. And then we're going to take a break, then we're going to have worship, and then we're going to come into the 11 o'clock service that will be more evangelistic or have an evangelistic tone to it. But the beauty of it is the people that are in the early morning service are going to stay over, and then they're going to help me minister to the people that come in, because then they can listen to a lesser meat-filled service because they've already been fed. And then they're staying over to help other people. And so that's part of their training as they grow up. So anyway, that's what we're doing in the future. So the purpose of that, what I'm getting to about this, is that in our meetings, there's going to have to come a point where we are ready to do what we need to do in a meeting of believers to launch into who we're supposed to be. In other words, we get to practice some of the things we're talking about. It can't all be just preaching and then, bless you, and everybody goes home. There has to come a point where we start walking in the things we're learning. And not just when you go home, you maybe put it in practice, but you actually do it while you're here. That's why at the DHT now, when we teach the Divine Healing Technician training, I pray for people all during the week, but at the last service, it's for the people that went through the training, and we bring the sick up, and they pray for them. That way they get to practice right then, and they get to see people get healed right then under their own hands, and they get to activate it before we leave. So this goes back into this point where he says, I will pray and cry aloud. Now, a lot of these things, unfortunately, we have just gotten to a place where we are too respectable. And when we got man's respect, we lost God's respect. And we'd rather please man than please God. And so there are things that we're going to have to do the whole purpose is to break through the veil of the flesh that doesn't want you to do these things, right? For instance, the veil of the flesh, your fleshly body, your soulish aspect, your soul, your mind, your non-renewed mind, it doesn't want you to pray in tongues. Why? Because it doesn't enjoy it, because it's not fruitful, right? It doesn't get anything from it, and it gets bored while you're praying in tongues. So you have to set a time, because when you start talking about it, and I'm going to do this, then your mind starts thinking, nope, I want to do this, I want to do this other thing. Or as soon as you settle down to pray, then all of a sudden your mind starts saying all this other stuff. Well, did you turn the stove off? Did you, was that the telephone? I thought I heard the telephone ring. I mean, your mind will just, say anything. It's like a little child saying, can we go? Are we done yet? Let's go play. Let's go do something else. So you have to take control over your mind so that you can settle down. And usually in the beginning, what will happen is it takes you so long to get to a place where you can focus on the things of the Spirit. Most people never get there. Most people just come in, pray a couple of prayers, and come back out, and it's totally soulish, right? It has no spirit connected with it. If you're involved with the world, if you've got a lot of interaction with people in the world and unsaved people and just everyday life, then generally it can take you a little longer to get to a place where you can focus on the things of the Spirit and get all this other stuff out of your mind because you're too distracted. So there comes a point where you have to be focused and be able to blot this other stuff out and go, I'm taking this amount of time and I'm going to do this. Now in the beginning, it's discipline. In the beginning, you set the time and you go, I'm going to do it for this long a period of time. Then after a while, what starts as a discipline then becomes a habit. And then once it becomes a habit, then the third stage is you actually become what the book of Acts talks about, how the people were addicted to the word, right? It was funny, we were talking last night when I got home, we had to run back and forth and do different things, and I think I finally got in bed. It was right at 2 o'clock, something like that, and still I'm lying there awake, and just before I went in to go to bed, I was talking to my mom, and I said, I've been preaching this evening around people, talking and everything, and I said, and yet I'm so trained that the last thing I do before I go to bed is read, that even now, if all I've been doing all day, I still feel that addiction to read before I go to sleep. I'm not, and honestly, I should have just done it because I laid awake for probably 2 hours. Probably should have just sat up and read and got it over with and just sitting there battling back and forth. So, but there comes a point where first it's a discipline, then it's a habit, then it becomes an addiction. And when it becomes that kind of addiction to the word is a good thing. All right, that's what you want. It helps you and it draws you into the things of God. Now, it's the same thing in prayer, and especially the same thing in praying in tongues, because again, your mind is unfruitful, but it's your spirit that prays. So you have to set yourself, because your mind will always try to lead you off. Now, the other thing is you have to kind of you can determine when you're going to pray, and you decide that. Now, most people are either like morning people or night people, one or the other. But you should be able to do what you want to do when you want to do it, and you ought to be able to discipline yourself to be able to do that. In other words, because my life is very hectic. It's routine in little doses, okay? Then it gets unroutine. I'll be here for a week or two, and then I'm on the road for a week or two. When I'm on the road, it's a totally different life. I'm in motels, and I drive all day, and I get to a motel, and I'm in a different city, different motel, and I'm driving to the next place, so I'm constantly going, so there's no routine. So it's very hard for me to get into a routine of either exercising or anything like that. I've got all the equipment I need, I just don't have the time, and I can't always take it with me, so I have to try to work it out. So the best thing I can do is go for a walk, even when I'm on the road, try to get time to walk a little bit. And so, but I have to, because my life is non-routine, I have to be able to set myself to do what I need to do when I can do it. Myself, usually, other than the fact that my mind is going, and if I'm at home, it's actually harder for me to fall asleep a lot of times than it is anywhere else. But when I'm on the road, a lot of times, or especially when I get on a plane, I say, okay, I'm going to be on a plane for the next, 18 to 21 hours. I decide I will sleep this much time, I will write this much time, I will read this much time, and then you can set yourself, discipline yourself to do those things. But that means you have to look at your clock and go, okay, I have to sleep now. And you don't feel like sleeping, but you decide to sleep. And so you have to realize your spirit is in control. You have to take control of your soul, and you have to take control of your body and tell your soul and your body what you want it to do. Now, if you're a night person, you should be able to discipline yourself to be able to say, I'm going to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock, whatever time is really early for you, and say, I'm going to pray for an hour. And I'm going to do it like I mean it, right? Not just get up and stand half asleep. You got to do it like you would do it at your peak hour. So you have to learn to do it. Why do you have to do this? Because there's going to come a point, if you are serious with God and you're building yourself up in the Spirit, that God's going to need you to do something for somebody, and I guarantee it's going to be at an hour inconvenient for your normal life, right? It will come when you're not ready. So you have to live ready, okay? You have to be ready to be able to do whatever you need to do. That's why you need to pray in tongues today. You say, why? Life is good, because you don't know what tomorrow is, right? And you don't want to wait till tomorrow to do it, because when they call you and say, hey, somebody just dropped dead, you don't want to go, well, call me back in 3 days, put them in the freezer until I get ready. And you can't do that, all right? You have to be ready right then, right? So you get ready now, and you build up so that tomorrow, if you don't have time to get built up, you can release what you've already got, right? Now, if you have a hard time getting up in the morning, do something. When I first started, now I've gotten to a place where I'm pretty much any time of the day. If I'm up early, I'm awake. When I get up, I'm up and gone. I'm wide awake as soon as I get up. At night, when I stay up late, that's usually when my kids were growing up. I stayed up late at night after they went to sleep, because that was the quiet time, and I could write and read and all that kind of stuff. So with me, I can really shift any time to do what I need to do. But when I first started, especially in the morning, it was hard, because I was more of a night person. And I actually had to set myself to be able to get up and stay awake and pray like I needed to. And I figured the best way to do that in the beginning, especially if you're going to pray in tongues in the morning, because I was a night person, then what I had to do was I had to, because when you pray in tongues, your mind is unfruitful, as I said, and so your mind will want to go back to sleep while your spirit is praying, okay? So I decided the best way for me to stay awake, because I'd go in, I'd get on my knees, I'd start praying, and pretty soon I'd wake up 2 hours later, And so then I would try sitting, and laying, prostrate before the Lord doesn't work, right? As soon as you lay down there, yeah, Lord, you're just gone. So that didn't work for me. So I had to try all these different things. So finally I figured out it was really hard for me to stay awake, because I stayed up real late that night before. Real hard for me to get up early and stay awake. So I decided I would go in and stand on the edge of the bathtub. See, if you stand on the edge of the bathtub, you can't fall asleep. If you fall asleep, you're going to crack your skull open, okay? Because you're going to fall in this thing. So I stand on the edge of the bathtub until I train myself to stay awake, and then after that, then I stayed awake from then on. So anyway, you got to do what you got to do, right? But at some point, you have to make the decision that I'm going to do this. Somebody's life, somebody's miracle is waiting for you. It's real simple. They're waiting for you to get disciplined, to build up, and to live for something greater than yourself. Amen? That's the bottom line for Christianity. So, here, like I'm talking about, when he talks about the travailing and the crying aloud. Now look back at verse 17. Evening, morning, and at noon will I pray and cry aloud. That's 3 times a day David prayed. Okay? And he shall hear my voice. He hath delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me. For there were many with me. God shall hear and afflict them, even he that abideth of old, Selah, because they have no changes, therefore they fear not God. Isaiah 54. Sing, O barren, starting in verse 1, thou that didst not bear, break forth into singing. Now what's he telling them? He said, barren one that cannot bear a child, sing, break forth in singing. Why? You're rejoicing before you see the child. Do you get that? That's faith, when you rejoice beforehand and you call those things which be not as though they were. Right? Well, if you're going to call those things which be not as though they were, you got to act like things are before they are. Okay? He says, break forth into singing and cry aloud. There it is again. Cry aloud. Thou that didst not travail with child, for more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife, saith the Lord. Now this is talking about bringing forth spiritual children predominantly. Okay? Enlarge the place of thy tent. Let them stretch forth the curtains of thine habitations. Spare not. Lengthen thy cords and strengthen thy states. Now you notice he's talking about enlarging and growing, even though he's talking to barren people. Right? In other words, he's saying, look, cry, speak, bring forth these things. Now act like it's true and get a bigger tent. Right? Get a bigger place. You know, you want to have an orphanage? Well, before the kids show up, you got to have a place for them. Right? People say, well, when the kids start showing up, then I'll get a place. No, it's too late then. Right? You build it and they'll come. Okay? That's what faith is. Faith prepares ahead of time. Faith makes the nest before the eggs are ready. Right? Okay. Thou shalt break forth on the right hand and on the left, and your seed shall inherit the Gentiles and make the desolate cities to be inhabited. Fear not, for thou shalt not be ashamed, neither be thou confounded. For thou shalt not be put to shame. For thou shalt forget the shame of your youth, and shalt not remember the reproach of thy widowhood any more. Now look at Isaiah chapter 58 on page 25. Just giving you some ideas where he said to cry aloud in these things. And he's talking about prayer to God and to speak things out. Notice what they're crying aloud. They're not saying, oh, God, help us. They're speaking forth these things and they're calling these things into being. Right? He says in verse 1, cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching to God. Wherefore have we fasted, say they, and you see not? Wherefore have we afflicted our soul? Now notice what fasting is. Fasting is not so much about afflicting the body as it is afflicting the soul. Why? Because it's not your body that gives you problems when you fast. At least not for the first 3 or 4 days. Right? Then after that, your body starts to give you a little bit of problem about it. But for the first 3 or 4 days, it is totally your soul. Because as soon as let me tell you, I'll just give you a secret. If you want to eat, I really don't know why homeless people don't get this. If a homeless person wanted to be fed, all they have to do is declare a fast. Because as soon as you declare a fast, everybody you know comes around and wants to take you out to eat. Isn't that right? If the homeless people got a hold of this, there would be no more hungry in America. Amen? I'm telling you. But as soon as you decide, I'm going to fast, everybody calls you up and says, hey, what are you doing for lunch? What are you doing? So, if you're ever low on money, just declare a fast and somebody will take you out to eat. Okay? It's just the way it works. Now, he says, wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and thou takest no knowledge. In other words, God, we're hurting ourselves and you're not paying attention. Behold, in the day of your fast you find pleasure, and exact all your labors. Behold, you fast for strife and debate, and to smite with the fist of wickedness. You shall not fast as you do this day, to make your voice to be heard on high. Do you hear that? It says, you shall not fast like you do this day, which is to make your voice to be heard on high. In other words, don't fast to make me hear you. And yet that's exactly the way almost every church I've ever been around, that's the way they fast. We're going to fast to get God's attention. And right here he says that's not why you fast. Right? You get that? So if you fast to get God's attention, that is the same thing as a child throwing a temper tantrum and saying, I'm going to hold my breath until I get my way. Right? I got news for you. Let them. right? If they hold it long enough, they'll pass out. There won't be a problem, right? Okay, you can't kill yourself by holding your breath, so don't worry about it, okay? But I'm telling you, you're going to have to, well, not getting into child rearing, but you're going to have to break that will, okay? If you don't break it, the state will break it for you someday. One of the two. So, he says, you are not to fast to make your voice be heard on high. Is it such a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Will you call this a fast, an acceptable day to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Notice this is not fasting toward God in that sense. It is fasting to break these things, and it is fasting to afflict your soul so that you can be effective in setting the oppressed free. Fasting is to fix you, not to fix God. Right? Fasting is to kill you. It's to help you die to self so that Christ who is in you can be seen. Right? It is not to get God's attention or to fast in a way to try to get God to do something. You know, we're going to twist God's arm by fasting. If we fast long enough, He will give us what we're asking. No. What you're doing is you fast so that you die enough to get His will in your life and to live out His will through your life. So, he says, and that you break every yoke, verse 7, is it not to deal your bread to the hungry, and that you bring the poor that are cast out to your house? When you see the naked, that you cover him, and that you hide not yourself from your own flesh. But yet that's what everybody does. In other words, he says, isn't the reason you fast is to cook your food and take it to the hungry? Yet when you fast, most people, don't give me around food. I'm fasting, don't give me around food. I'm trying to fast. No, it's not for you to avoid food. It's for you to cook food, and you decide not to eat it so you can take it to the hungry, right? If you're only not eating because you're staying away from food, there's no virtue in that. Virtue is being right there and going, no, I refuse. I'm in charge of my body. I'm in charge of my soul. Body and soul, shut up. You are not eating. The poor, the hungry are going to eat this, and then you take it to them, right? And then you tell them, when you're there talking, listen, I cooked this. I brought it to you. I'm not eating. You're going to eat. Now, why do you let them eat and you not eat? Because while their mouth is full, yours is not. And you can talk to them while they eat. And you can preach, and you can witness to them, and tell them things. It's not just so you can go have a meal together, right? You take them to eat, and while they're eating, their mouth is full, and they can't talk, so you talk, right? Good way to shut them up. So, he said in verse 8, then, after you fasted like this, then shall your light break forth as the morning, and your health shall spring forth speedily. And your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be thy rearward. Okay? In other words, He's got your back. Okay? Then shall you call, and the Lord shall answer. You will cry, and He shall say, here I am. If you take away from the midst of you the yoke, the putting forth of the finger, pointing the finger at people, and speaking vanity, and if you draw out your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall your light rise in obscurity, and thy darkness be as the noonday. And the Lord shall guide thee continually. Hear that? Not every now and then, continually. Now this is in the Old Testament, and yet this is one of the key promises of being in the New Covenant. That as many as are led, constantly led, the original Greek says, consistently led, every day, constantly led, they are the sons of God. So that is a key thing, to be continually led. Most people think of leading as, well, God led me to do this at that time. I wish God would lead me to again like He did before. No, those are special leadings. The everyday leading is what Romans 8 talks about, which is to kill the deeds of the flesh and to do what you're supposed to do. And you don't need a leading to lay hands on the sick, to pray for the sick, to cast out devils, to do anything else, because you already have a commandment that says to do it. You don't need a leading to obey a commandment. Remember that, all right? A commandment is the leading to obey it, right? If it wasn't, it'd just be called a suggestion, right? It's not a suggestion. It's a commandment. You got that? So, he says, the Lord shall guide thee continually and satisfy your soul in drought and make fat thy bones. Now, that is not as bad as it sounds, okay? What he means is he's going to take care of you. Okay? You're not going to go hungry, and you're going to be healthy and strong. And you shall be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters fail not. And they that shall be of thee shall, now this is, well, I'll mention in a minute, shall build the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. Now, that is actually in a couple of different prophecies by different people at different times over a period of about 70 years that was prophesied over us and has come to pass. And even these meetings are the result of these prophecies to restore the paths to dwell in, to be a repair of the breach, to bring things back to the way they were. We've become so modern in many cases that we have forgotten the foundations of the church. So, he says, the restorer of paths to dwell in, if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on thy holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. Now, so far we've talked about crying aloud, we've talked about groaning within, even being troubled, even travailing to a large degree, but now we're going to look at travailing to a more detail, I guess I should say. In Isaiah chapter 66, starting in verse 6, a voice of noise from the city, a voice from the temple, a voice of the Lord that renders recompense to his enemies. Before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child. Who hath heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day, or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. Shall I bring to the birth and not cause to bring forth? Saith the Lord. Shall I cause to bring forth and shut the womb, saith thy God? Now, what he's saying is, here he's saying, listen, as soon as they travailed, they brought forth. God was waiting, because he has to, waiting for Zion, in this case the church, to travail, to bring forth. And as soon as they did, just like with Daniel, as soon as Daniel prayed, he said his prayer was heard and the angel was sent with the answer. But it took 21 days to get through. Why? It wasn't on God's part, and it wasn't on Daniel's part. You get that? The problem was the enemy that stood between. For some reason, Christians, when they seem to experience a delay in an answer, the first thing they want to do is blame it on God. Either it's not his will, he hadn't answered, I don't have enough faith, something, and when in reality, it's in the mail. It's just on its way. But we get impatient. You know, we're the microwave generation or whatever. You know, we want this now. If it's not now, it must not be working, right? You know, you get frustrated because you can't get your food in 30 seconds, right? And you think, what's the matter with this thing? You know, it's 30 seconds, my food ought to be hot by now. Think back where we came from, okay? At least you're not having to heat it on a rock, okay? So, some things take a little time. Now, in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 5, for thus saith the Lord, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask ye now and see whether a man doth travail with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness. Jeremiah here is referring to men operating in travail like a woman, because we know men, and this has to be spiritual because we know that men cannot give birth to a child. But what he's saying is, I'm seeing these men crying to God just like women do when they're in travail, but it's coming from inside, and it's not just a physical travailing, but it's a physical travailing birth in spiritual travailing, right? And inwardness. Now, let's look at this in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. And now I'm turning this back toward tongues because that is our topic here. He says, and I, brethren, when I came to you, and starting in verse 1, came not with excellency of speech or of wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God. For I determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. And my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. We would ask why. Verse 5 says, so that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Howbeit, we speak wisdom among them that are perfect, yet not the wisdom of this world. So now you notice he's talking about a wisdom that he speaks, but it's not the wisdom of this world. Now James says there's two types of wisdom. There is an earthly wisdom, which is devilish. And then there is a divine wisdom, which is godly. Isn't that right? So we have two types of wisdom. Here he says, I came to you with a wisdom, but it was not wisdom like man has. It was not earthly wisdom. It was not devilish wisdom, but it was divine wisdom. Now watch what he says. He said, yet not the wisdom of this world, nor of the princes of this world that come to nothing. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery. Hear that? He speaks it in a mystery. Even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory. Now, here's what you have to realize. You think you discovered God. In reality, he's been waiting for you to show up, and his plan includes you. Right? He planned way ahead for you to get here. He knew you were going to be here. This is not a surprise to him, and he planned this from before the foundation of the world. Right? So you're not going to take him by surprise. That's why God never gets in a hurry. Why? Because it's not a surprise. There's no crisis to him. There's no emergency to him, right? When you think in terms of the working of miracles, they're only a miracle to us. They're not miracles to God, right? When you can do anything, then nothing's a miracle, right? I mean, think about that, right? It's not a big deal to him, okay? It is only a big deal to us. So that's why he calls these things. But yet, notice, even though it's not a big deal to him, he made provision for that for every believer. That's how much he takes care of us. So he says, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory, not even unto his glory, but to our glory. Why? To give us a part in his great plan, which none of the princes of this world knew. They didn't know this plan. For had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. In other words, had they known what the crucifixion was going to bring about, they surely wouldn't have done it. Why? Because the crucifixion, listen, do you think that the devil would care if the crucifixion just got you saved? That's all it did was that, okay, now when you die, you get to go to be with God. What would he care? What would he even care? The reason the devil hates the crucifixion is because if Jesus didn't leave, he couldn't send back his spirit. And now, whenever the devil only had to deal with one man walking around this earth filled with God, now all men can be filled with the Spirit of God. And instead of, on the day of Pentecost, instead of dealing with one Jesus, he's dealing with 120. Now all of a sudden it's a whole lot harder for the devil to keep his hands on and knowing what all is going on. It's hard enough stopping one. He couldn't even stop him. Now what's he going to do with 120? And pretty soon he's got 3,000 more. And pretty soon, daily, were added to the church, such as should be saved. And all those that were added to the church, every one of them got filled with the Spirit. Why? Because that was the norm. Every one of them began speaking other tongues. Every one of them began exhibiting displays of power. And that's what Jesus was trying to get to. And that's why the devil didn't want it to happen, because had he known that was going to take place, he would have never crucified Jesus. It'd be much better just let him live and let him go on and let him live his one life and let him go on doing whatever he did. But instead, the devil didn't know it, didn't know what was going on, and he had his henchmen kill Jesus, and because of that, it spread. Amen? Because if he had known it, he wouldn't have done it. Now, he says in verse 9, but as it is written, eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for them that love him. And we've always heard that quoted, but we never heard this next part hardly. In verse 10 he says, but, okay, that used to be true. That's an Old Testament quote. That used to be true, but it's not true anymore. He says, but God hath revealed them. Them what? The things that God has prepared for those that love him. Things that eye hadn't seen and ear hadn't heard. Right? Now, see, we read that, we go, oh yeah, nobody knows what it's going to be like over there. Oh, I hadn't seen and ear, oh, the things that God, the mansions that God has prepared for us. That's not what he's talking about at all. That has nothing to do with what he's talking about. What he's talking about there is he says, you have no idea what God has prepared for us. Why? Because in the Old Testament, they didn't have an idea. They had no clue. There was no idea of what the resurrection was going to bring about. But it says now God has revealed these things to us. Now watch. How? He has revealed these things to us by His Spirit. Why do you think He wants His Spirit in you? So you can know. That's what He says. For the Spirit searches all things, yea, the deep things of God. For what man knows the things of a man, save the Spirit of man which is in him? Even so the things of God knoweth no man, but the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God. Why? That we may know. Might know, put it that way. The things that are freely given to us of God. Why does God want you to have the Spirit? So you can know all the things that He has given you. Now, how are you going to know these things? Well, John said we already know them. But he said, how do we know them? We know them in here. But how do we get them here? Well, again, the mind of the Spirit knows these things. He prays the perfect will of God out of your life through you praying in other tongues. As we've already seen, I'm trying to take this precept by precept and laying it line upon line and always taking it back to our foundation so that as you pray in other tongues, and then especially when you interpret that out, now you're not only being built up in the Spirit, but now your mind is being fruitful too because you're understanding. You're not being unwise. Paul told the Ephesians, says, don't be unwise, but wise, knowing the will of God. Yeah. Well, how do you know the will of God? Well, the Spirit's going to pray the perfect will of God out through you. All you have to do is interpret it, and now you know the will of God. And you can work that out in your entire life, right? Again, it goes back to praying in other tongues. It's why it's so important. Yeah. Now, so he says, do you realize that's what he said? Why we have the Spirit is so that we can know the things that God has given to us, right? And not just given to us, but are freely given. Not things you have to work for. Okay? I'm going to interject right here just for a real quick second here. Got to send you to break. You have to realize everything, we get what we get because Jesus did what He did, right? We don't get what we get because of what we do. We get what we've got because of what Jesus did, right? That's called grace, right? Now, if I could afford to buy a high-powered vehicle, right? Super turbocharged sports car, right, hot off the press type of thing, you know what I'm saying? Right off the factory line. I could, because there's cars around. I think we saw one on an ad the other day for, $325,000, something like that, outrageous price. And I'm thinking, man, you imagine how many Bible schools you could build with that. Anyway, but let's say you got this super high-powered sports car. Now, let's say someone says, Curry, I just want to bless you. I want to give you this sports car. Okay, there it is. There it's sitting there. And I say, you know what? I really want to bless my grandchildren. I've got a grandchild that he's 10, and I've got him all the way down to, actually sons and daughters, all the way down to 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 10-year-old. I really want to bless him the very best I can. I want to give him this $325,000 car. Now, can I give him that car? Sure. Can he drive it? Nope. Why? Because he is not mature enough to understand how to function in it. If I gave it to him, put the key in it, started up, and said, now put it in gear like this, and there you go. Guess what? I just killed my grandson. Isn't that right? Why? Because he's not mature enough to handle it. There are things, and this is where people miss it. I don't know why. There are things that God has provided for us that are available. They're done. They're set. But if I want to partake in that, then I have to be ready for that. Now, it's not me deserving it. See, here's where people mess up. They think, okay, if I do this, I'll deserve that. And if I do this, then God will give me that because I deserve it, or because I've worked for it, or whatever I've done. Somehow I've done something, and then it's no longer a gift, then it's the wages. You get it? And God's not going to be beholden to anybody, right? So He's already done so much more for you that He will, no matter what you do, He will never owe you a thing, right? But yet we owe Him everything, okay? But now, it's just like in the military, or even in the Olympics. I could maybe talk to somebody and get you a place on an Olympic team. I might be able to get you on the field track and field team where you're going to run the 440, 880, whatever it is, different tracks. I could get you on the team, maybe. But now, if I wrote you and said, here, I got you on the team, you're in, and you go, oh, that's awesome, and you just keep sitting there on the couch and that's good. That's going to be fun, man. I can't wait. When's the Olympics coming? Oh, 2 weeks? Okay, that's going to be fun. I can't believe I'm in the Olympics, right? read the other day, you know what they call the children of couch potatoes? Tater tots. So, now, okay. But I can get you on the team, right? But if you go out there without having prepared, you're not going to win. And you're going to look like an idiot. Isn't that right? I'm just speaking blunt. It's not that you deserve to win just because you trained hard. A lot of people train hard, right? But you have to train right. And then you have to run so as to win. Right? So it's not that we look to God and go, okay, God, I'm going to fast. And when I fast, you're going to give me a gift. No, I fast so that I can shed myself so that I can operate effectively in this gift. God's not waiting to give me the gift. He gave me the gift when he gave me Christ. But there's still so many layers of me that you can't see the gift. But as I die and I start peeling off layers of me, then the gift can be operated because it's closer to the surface. Does that make sense to you? So it's not that we deserve the gift. The gift's there. You lack nothing in that sense. You were born again complete in Christ. I'm switching over into the new man now for a minute. All right, but you're born again complete in Christ. Now, just because you're born again complete doesn't mean you can function fully in all of it. Why? Because you have to renew your mind. And there are disciplines that you are going to do that if you don't do, you will never fully function to the potential God ordained you to function. It says in every house there are vessels of honor and dishonor. But a good man, right? He says, but if you're going to be a vessel of honor, then you will purge yourself. You get that? You purge yourself. It's not that God does it. Why? God says, look, I've given you my name, my word, my spirit. I've given you gifts. I've given you power. I've given you everything. What are you going to do with it? And what do we want to do? We want to have a party. Now, understand what I mean by that. We want to just enjoy it and bask in it rather than use it for the purpose that it's intended. It'd be like, okay, if I had a $325,000 sports car, what good would that do me? You say, well, it'll go 210 miles an hour. Yeah, and where am I going to drive a car 210 miles an hour? Right? Not around here, right? I couldn't afford the tickets, right? So we have to realize what we have to get ready to use, and we have to grow up to be able to use it. Now, it's not that God is waiting for you to attain something to give it to you. He's waiting for you to shed something so that you can function in what he's already given you. Do you get that? It's not God, it's not a reward. God is not rewarding you with gifts. He is allowing you, he's already given you that reward. He's already given you these things. Now it's up to you to shed enough of yourself so that only Christ can be seen. Right? Now, he says in verse 13, which things also we speak not in the words which man's wisdom teaches, but which the Holy Ghost teaches. Now hear that? This is not words that man teaches or man's wisdom, but words which the Holy Ghost teaches. Now, I guarantee you this is a direct reference to praying in tongues. This ties right in with what Paul told the Romans. Watch. He says, teacheth, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. But the natural man receives not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Right? Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. But he that is spiritual judges all things, yet he himself is judge of no man. For who has known the mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him? This is an Old Testament verse. Then he says, but we have the mind of Christ. Well, who has known the mind of the Lord? He just said it up here. Who knows the mind of the Lord except the Spirit? Who knows the mind of God, the mind of the Spirit, except the Spirit which is in him, right? So this Spirit of God is in you. He knows the mind of the Lord. That's why he says, but we have the mind of Christ. Well, if we have the mind of Christ, that mind of Christ is there. And who knows that mind? The Spirit. How do you get the Spirit to get the mind of Christ out of your spirit into your mind? You do that by praying in other tongues. You renew your mind to the Word of God, Romans 12, 1 through 3 actually. But you have to renew your mind, but you speak in other tongues, you pray these things out, you interpret them, and as you interpret them, now you are getting the mind of Christ in your mind as well as in your spirit. That's the purpose of this. He knows the mind. He prays the mind of God. He prays the perfect will of God for you, and that forms you into Christ, and it is this travailing in spirit that brings that forth. You can travail for yourself, which most people end up doing at some point, or you can travail for others. And the idea is, in a body, in a fellowship, the body should be travailing for one another, right? Because then you will definitely not pray selfishly.
That's good.
All right? Take a quick break. Take a break, and we will come back in a few minutes and pick this back up. But take a quick break. Let's do maybe 10, 15 minutes, and we will pick this back up. So.